distinguished members of the Dean's Office, Head of Research Group, fellow lecturers, students, and our honored speakers and moderator.
Ini kelihatan nih di situ. Kita kelihatan di situ emang. Tadi aku gini-gini, nggak apa-apa, biarin aja. Kemarin sempat dibilang kita ada tema kostum nggak? Aku bilang bajak laut aja. Ini juga nanya. Aku bilang aku pakai marun, pakai dasi marun. Ih, kata gitu. Oh, ih.
Udah tahu hitam-hitam aja udah cukup. Saya mana ya?
Itu. Oh, tuh, maksudnya. Suaranya masuk ke sini.
Enggak.
Maaf ya telat harusnya sekarang.
Oke, selamat pagi kepada semua yang sudah hadir di Zoom dan juga yang di lokasi. Kita akan memulai dalam pukul 9.15 sambil menunggu beberapa peserta hadir lebih lengkap. Terima kasih. Okay, good. Good morning to all attending to this session, distinguished members of the Dean's Office and head of the research group, fellow lecturers, students, and our honored speaker and moderator. First, I would like to extend my greeting to Dr. Pun, the wanderer from KU11, Mr. Jihan Shah, who is not only a faculty member in architecture at ITB, also serve as an expert staff member at the Ministry of Public Works and Housing, Ms. Sri Suryani, staff members of the Housing and Settlement Research Group, and then Ms. Husnul Hanifati, a representative from Architecture Sun Frontiers and a lecturer at the 10 November Institute of Technology in Surabaya. This webinar titled Whose Willingness? Urban Slum Involution Program will be moderated by Ms. Dian Skartaji. The webinar will be conducted live from the seminar room at the second floor of LabTech 9A and streamed live via YouTube on SAPPK ITV channel. As you can see at the screen, this event consists of several sessions, starting with opening by the Vice Dean from School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, followed by a speech from the head of the Housing and Settlement Research Group. The four speakers will deliver their presentation for around 20 minutes, followed by a discussion of equal length, concluding with a summary by the moderator. We kindly request all participants to stay until the end of the event, which is expected to conclude by 11 a.m. this morning. For the opening session, we would like to invite Dr. Aswin Indraprasta, the Vice Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, to deliver the remarks, please.
Ya, thank you Pak Vibia for the opening. Selamat pagi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam sehat. Very good morning, participants. Ya, we come to the 13th webinar series held by SAPPK ITB with the theme Sustainable Development in Built Environment. So, as mentioned by Pak Divya, this webinar today will raise the awareness in the topics of whose willingness, urban slum involution program. So, right now we are honored to have our guest, Associate Professor Dr. Kun the Wanderer. Thank you very much for your coming, and we are very honored to have you here. Dr. Kun come from the Faculty of Architecture, Department of Architecture, KU11. We also have Pak Dr. Muhammad Yansyah Siregar, the expert staff to the Ministry of Public Works and Housing in 2011 until 2017. And also a member of Housing and Human Settlement Research Group of SAPPK. The third speaker is Dr. Fresh Dr. Sri Suryani, PhD, member of Housing and Human Settlement Research Group of SAPPK. And last but not least, we have Husnul Hanifati, representative of Architecture Sun Frontiers, Architecture Department from Institute Technology 10 November in Surabaya. Also, we would like to thank our moderator, Dr. Dian Skartaji, also member from Housing and Human Settlement Research Group. Ladies and gentlemen, the participant of this webinar, we hope that this webinar will bring new insights and also new development of the following topics. And we do hope that you can have a fruitful discussion after several speakers present their materials. And hope that by the end of the discussion and also by the end of this webinar, we have the more understanding about the topics. That's all our remarks. We congratulate Housing and Human Settlement Research Group for conducting this webinar. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Aswin. Next speech by Dr. Engineer Agustinus Adip Abadi, MSc, the head of the Housing and Settlement Research Group. The floor is for Pak Adip, please.
Thank you, Pak Divya. Pak Aswin, yang terhormat, our special guest, Dr. Kundo Pedeler, Ibu Kusnul Niviati, and other speakers, Dr. Jehansa and Dr. Sri Suryani, and all attendees, webinar participants, both offline and online. Good morning. Greeting to all of us. Thanks to the God that we allow to meet in this morning webinar, which is routine activity of SAPPD ETB. This event is part of the school program to introduce the research group and its member and share their knowledge and discuss them with related parties outside the ETB campus. Thanks to Dr. Kun, already here with us and will share his knowledge with us. Before listening the presentation further, as the chairman of the Housing and Settlement Research Group, allow me to introduce the group that consists of 9 members. Here we can see myself as a head of a Housing and Settlement Research Group, Dr. Vivi Pratiwi, Dr. Alice here, and Dr. Sri Suryani. On the left side, Dr. Bambajahan Siregar, and Engineer Triyono, also Dr. Samsirina, Mas Divya as MC, and Dr. Dian Skartaji. We can see here that we have a very limited member with various interests in research. Next, please. We hope that this short introduction will be a bridge to build further cooperation and academic activities in the teaching, research, and community services, which are at the core of our activities as academicians in the ETB. Finally, we hope today SAPPD webinar series with the topic Whose Willingness Urban Slum Involution program will develop our understanding and knowledge on the issues of slum and human settlement in general. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Pak Adip. Okay, now we move to the core part of our event today. Let me briefly go over the rules, especially for participants who are joining online. We kindly ask participants to use their real names on Zoom. So everyone wish to contribute a discussion point or a question, they may do so after obtaining information from the moderator, or by writing their input in the chat box, specifying the speaker to whom the question is directed. And then without further delay, we invite Dr. Dian Skartaji, a member of Housing and Settlement Research Group of the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, Institut Teknologi Bandung. Dr. Dian completed her PhD at the University of Kitakyushu in Japan, and her research interests include lifestyle of and environment studies on residential areas, indoor thermal environment, and building energy efficiency. Dr. Dian, the floor is yours, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope you are all doing well today. So first, I would like to say thank you to our fantastic and the coolest MC today, Mr. Divya, for setting the tone for this webinar event this morning, and for giving me the opportunity to be a moderator today. And I'm so really honored to be a moderator today. And before we dive in, I would like to say thank you to all the participants who are joining us this morning, and also to Dr. Adib Abadi as Head of Housing and Human Settlement Research. And so today's webinar topic is Whose Willingness Urban Slum Involution Program. So today's webinar topic, Whose Willingness Urban Slum Involution Program, addresses an important aspect for urban development. Since the early 20th century, the term slum has been used to describe dense, deteriorating urban environments, often accompanied by governmental interventions focused on material improvement. However, we rarely stop to ask, whose willingness are we addressing when it comes to the improvement of these areas? And why does the concept of slum matter? And who defines it? What assumptions underlie the interventions that seem unable to keep pace with urban growth, leaving slum condition persistent? There are some of the thought-provoking questions that today's webinar will explore as we discuss the subjection and development of slums, while opening the floor to potential alternatives for understanding human habitations. And we are very fortunate today to have an outstanding panel of the speakers and who will delve into these issues. But before we go into their presentation, let me briefly introduce each of them. Our first speaker is Dr. Kun the Wanderer. Could you please just stand up, maybe? Yeah, he is an associate professor at KU Leuven Faculty of Architecture and Planning for People, Urbanity and Landscape Research Group, KU Leuven Department of Architecture, and also a chair of the KU Leuven Regional Committee for Southeast Asia. Our second speaker is Dr. Muhammad Jehansyah Siregar, STMT PhD, here with us. And he is a senior lecturer at Housing and Human Settlement Research Group, Department of Architecture, School of Architecture Planning and Policy Development, ITB. He was also an expert staff to the Ministry of Public Work and Housing from 2011 to 2017. And our third speaker is Dr. Sri Suryani, here with us, STMST PhD. She's also a lecturer at Housing and Human Settlement Research Group, Department of Architecture, School of Architecture Planning and Policy Development, ITB. And our last speaker couldn't join here in this room, but she joins by Zoom in online. She is Mrs. Husnul Hanifati, STM Ars. She is the representative of Architecture Sans Frontiers Indonesia, a non-profit participatory organization committed to social, cultural, and environmental justice in architectural construction and urbanism work. And she is also a lecturer at Department of Architecture, Institut Teknologi 10 November, Surabaya. So, please go to next, please. Okay, so our first speaker, Dr. Kun the Wanderer, next, holds a Master Architecture from San Lucas School of Architecture in Ghent, an MA in Social and Cultural Anthropology from KU Leuven, and a PhD in Anthropology from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. He also gained first-hand experience in Asian urban issues while working as a researcher at the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, with his PhD focusing on
urban discourses in Bangkok in the late 90s. So today he will be presenting on system thinking, a pathway toward regenerative peri-urbanization. So to save the time, we invite Dr. Kun to give the presentation. Dr. Kun, we are excited to hear your insights. The time is yours.
Would you like to share your own screen or from ours?
I thought I was asked to share my screen, but yes. No, I prefer to use my screen.
I've already been co-host, so you can share from your laptop already.
Could you share the screen?
Share again, maybe.
Share screen button. Use this microphone. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for introducing me. First of all, I would like to thank organizers for inviting me. Everyone keeps asking me how many times have you been in Indonesia? And I answered right away, this is the second time, and last time was 2007. So long time ago. The title of this presentation may confuse you a little bit because it's about peri-urbanization. And therefore I provided some preamble slides to link up with the focus of this webinar. Basically, we heard the definition of slums. Basically, it's a reaction. It's what happens when urban populations are growing excessively and cities cannot provide sufficient housing. So people find housing in mostly extra legal ways in underserved areas and in lower than normal, what we consider normal housing conditions. What happens is urban populations grow and cities expand and expand very rapidly. As you can see from the figure here to the right, the red areas are the peri-urban zones, and they are very, very considerable. So what is happening is urban cities expand, and this expansion happens in not always legal ways needed. What happens is it's very often left to private initiatives, and these private initiatives are happening in a haphazard way and not always a very organized way, which makes it very difficult for authorities later on to provide infrastructure and to provide amenities. So it is likely to create trouble. It's likely to create conflict. But on the other hand, it also creates possibilities. It creates loopholes for people to settle. People to settle in marginal lands, in underserved lands, in lands that are flooded, that are likely to be subject to hazards of all kinds, landslides, and etc. So that is not a foreign completely outlandish thing to happen. I found this recent study on London that has been studying the peri-urbanization process from 1985 to 2018, and basically mapping the hazardous the hazardous outreach outskirts of Bandung, and identifying how that is going further and further away from the city center and creating multiple hazards. Very interesting study. Try to update yourself on this. The impacts are more than just the natural hazards, because people encroach on the natural habitat of species and of plants and of ecosystems. They bring with them very often livestock. So we have an overlap of human habitation, livestock, and natural wildlife. And that is the source of zoonosis. And we all are familiar with zoonosis because we had a very recent outbreak of COVID-19. COVID-19 is none other than create a zoonosis that reached global impact. Just like climate change is reaching a level of global impact. And we have several of these crises happening at the same time. You have the climate change, we have COVID-19, we have the reduction of biodiversity, we have migration at levels unprecedented, ever seen before. We have economic trouble, we have financial trouble. So compound crises lead to a situation in which we need to investigate, to examine, to approach, and to deal with these problems in a systemic and transdisciplinary way. Transdisciplinary is something different from interdisciplinary, something different from multidisciplinary, in the sense that transdisciplinary starts from social issues, real life issues, not academic questions as such. Real life issues are taken up by academics and are dealt with in a co-creative way. Systemic is what I'm going to talk a little bit about more. Of course, we all know systems. We know the concept systems. We have social systems. We have educational systems, ecological systems, solar systems, etc., etc. But what exactly is a system? The definition is an interconnected set of elements coherently organized in a way that achieves something. The last part, that achieves something, is very important. It is more than the sum of its parts. Our body is more than the cells. Our university is more than a conglomerate of students and teachers. An ecosystem is more than the individual plants and animals. To illustrate this, I will show you this phenomenon of, I hope it works. Yes, the sound is not there, but I don't know whether you have this phenomenon here. The flock of birds at dusk that is going around in the sky in a seemingly haphazard way. Now, what is driving this system, this population? There is no leader. All birds are following basically the minutest adjustment of the bird next to them. So they are a system of individual elements. Do they serve a purpose? Yes. What purpose? They seek for a place to stay overnight. Simple as that. So this is how a system works. There's a hierarchy and there's Now, how do I stop this? I hope this works. That's right. So when we think
Recording in progress.
when we use systems thinking, we are trying to look at not only the elements, but the relationship between those elements, not only in terms of cause and effect, but the relationship between those elements. The element is always in a bigger whole. The individual is part of a population. The population is part of a community. The community of an ecosystem, the ecosystem of a biome, the world. And we are discovering how we are part of a biosphere, a wider galactic system. Now, very urbanization is not going up to the galaxy. But anyway, what is needed in systems thinking is to zoom in to the individual element and zoom out to the bigger whole, looking for patterns, looking for the in-between spaces rather than to the individual elements. So what we try to do is to gather how a system works, what purpose it serves. Okay. Two characteristics are very important: stocks and flows. Very easy to understand. The bathtub. Or you fill the water, that's a flow, inflow. You pull up the plug and you have an outflow. While you're taking a bath, you're enjoying the stock of water. Simple as that, stocks and flows. There's also something else that is very important, the feedback loops. Not only the relationship that between two elements, but how these two elements, the relationship between those elements have an effect on other elements. It can be a balancing or a reinforcing feedback. We all are familiar with the rising temperatures. People told me now it's warmer than usual here in Bandung. So rising temperatures, yes. What is the effect of the rising temperatures? All kinds of international bodies are taking measures to mitigate the climate change and to keep the rising temperatures up to a limit. And this hopefully has the effect that the temperature will be kept to 1.5 degrees. The temperature rise, hopefully. So that's a balancing feedback loop. But there's also the reinforcing feedback loop. Unavoidably, because of the rising temperature, the ice area is diminishing, which means that the reflection and the absorption of solar energy is rising and the temperatures are rising. Very simple to understand, but very difficult to discern in reality. If we look at the peri-urbanization, there's all kinds of processes going on. There's all kinds of stocks and flows happening. There's evolutions in terms of infrastructure, services, housing, employment, economy, and all these stocks and flows have an effect on each other. So stocks and flows, inflow and outflow in the peripheral area. And all these different stocks and flows have an effect on one another. So when we make a systems map, we come to this kind of graph where we have not only the elements, but the relationship between the elements. Do they have a positive or negative effect? And what is the effect of the positive effect and what are the feedback loops. And we do this in order to identify leverage points where we can influence the system and hopefully improve how it works, and ultimately how it can be performing less bad and more good, reducing the negative effects of waste generation, emissions, etc., and increasing the positive effects. That's why we do systems mapping. That's why we try to identify leverage points. And thanks to systems thinking, we gradually manage to move away from the conventional notion of sustainability, which is still anchored in the way of mechanistic thinking of economic growth, towards the contemporary way of looking at sustainability more in terms of ecosystem viability, in terms of social justice, etc., etc. But increasingly, and hopefully very soon, we'll move towards a notion of sustainability that is focused on regeneration, thinking not only how can we minimize the negative effects, but how can we create positive effects. And that requires a holistic approach. The understanding is basically to reverse our thinking, in the sense that the economy is embedded in our society. What we want is what we pay for. What we pay for is what we suffer or benefit from. That is our society. And our society is part of a bigger whole, of a biosphere. Now, the importance is to move towards a way of thinking in which nature is an equal partner in whatever we do. And this is a very important shift for engineers and designers. So beyond the contemporary notion of sustainability, thanks to instruments, tools like the SDGs, we can move away from degenerative development towards regenerative development. From degenerate cultures towards regenerative cultures, active. And that is a very complex process. We try with a colleague, well, mainly a colleague of mine, is trying to develop this in a design studio that he is managing in our faculty, and where he basically thinks nature first, biosphere first. That means we need to strive towards an adaptable city, towards a natural city, towards a connected city, towards a circular city. And that leads him to a scheme like this. The scheme is basically centered on the design process, the process of the studio. The process of the studio is embedded in a perception where nature comes first. And there's 4 drivers. The 4 drivers are to strive towards resilient places that generate positive vibes, natural processes where nature comes first, circular processes where reuse is the norm, not the exception, resilient cultures where we can move, but move wisely. So. And again, this is applying systems thinking. So how do we do this? Yesterday, in another seminar, the local actions were emphasized over and over again. How do we do this? Small interventions, acupuncture, urbanism, nature first, green areas, make a plan. Not leave it up to whatever is green, leave it there. The trees around here, I admire the trees, how green your avenues are. It, of course, it's only in this part of the city, I know that. But nature first. Water. Make a plan. Storage, stocks and flows. These are examples in Europe. These are examples in Belgium. I don't need to tell you that. But it's not by chance. Nature first. Trees, you have them. Please don't cut them down. Where they are not present, plant them. Food. 1 square meter of garden per household. Undoable? It's perfectly doable. We are planners, we are architects, so we need to work with materials. But we need to see the materials in their context. And their context for that, we need again to zoom in and zoom out. We need to look at the materials in the components that we use in our buildings, in our infrastructure. We need to look at that in the interiors that we are shaping, in the buildings envelopes that we are creating, in the built environment that we are setting up in our neighborhoods and grow into cities and wider. And that's how we design buildings. The soil, the land, we cannot do without the land. We can build off the land, yes, but we can still have to have our foundations. Our foundations need to be there, and our end users need to be there. And then the rest is envelopes, the scheme, the structure, the services, the organization, the interior that we use. That's where we build towards an integrated system. And this is how this studio is conducted. And this is what I think we should do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kun, for your insightful presentation on system thinking and also urban transition process. And we also heard about the impacts of peri-urbanization and also the natural hazards. And the first thing we have to think about is nature, of course. Okay, and how to have a great studio design process by using system thinking. Thank you very much. And before we go to the discussion session, we have to go to the second speaker, Dr. Muhammad Jahansa Siregar, STMT PhD. He is an academic and lecturer at the ITB and a core member of Housing and Settlement Expertise Group. And he served as an advisor to Minister of Public Housing, demonstrating his leadership in the housing sector. And Dr. Jahansa earned his PhD in regional and urban planning from the University of Tokyo in 2006. His expertise has been acknowledged through his roles as a judge in competitions and as an urban manager at URDI 2006 to 2007. He also holds positions in several advisory councils, including HUD, Forum HUD, and the Indonesian Vision 2033 team. So today he will be presenting on development of urban slum improvement in Indonesia. Dr. Jehansa, we are eager to hear from you. Please, the time is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My presentation title is more about policy evaluation regarding the same issue about slums. The title is Evaluating the Evolution of Slum Improvement Programs in Indonesia. So we have three almost similar words here: involution, evolution, and evaluate. Here. Okay. I have several outlines. Firstly, I would like to make overview of the development in Indonesia, especially in housing and urban development from period to period, and then begin to analyze what are the challenges actually Indonesia governments are facing now, up to now, yeah, since the title of this seminar is about the involution. And then we are going to more fundamental analysis, trying to look at the root causes in these very complex problems. And again, trying to make conclusion. Firstly, an overview of how slums improvement have evolved over decades in Indonesia since 1970s, actually. We have Kampung Improvement Program, and 1980s to 1990s, 2000s, 2010s, and up to now, 2020s, we still have many kind of programs. In 1970s, Indonesia had the Kampung Improvement Program launched in Jakarta and replicated nationally. The IP was one of the earliest systematic attempts to improve slums. It aimed to upgrade kampung rather than to demolish them, focusing on providing basic infrastructure like roads, drainage, water supply, sanitation. The IP began to implement community-based approach. Residents participated in the planning and management of upgrades. Instead of relocation, existing settlements were upgraded. International agencies like the World Bank helped fund KIP in its early phase. And as the impact by improving access to water, sanitation, and roads, KIP enhanced living conditions, benefiting many low-income residents. And in 1980s to 1990s, the program followed by urban development programs and expansion of KIP. The KIP approach was expanded to other cities across Indonesia, beyond Jakarta, like Surabaya, Bandung, Medan, to meet the growing urban population. At that time, program shifted towards more integrated urban planning, linking slum upgrading with larger infrastructure investment, including housing, transportation, and sanitation projects. And then land ownership and tenure security became a growing challenge as land values in urban areas rose. Many residents in informal settlements lack formal ownership, creating a vulnerability to evictions. And as the economy grew, more public housing in Indonesia known as Rumah Susun Sederhana Sewa or Rusunawa. Rusunawa projects were introduced, although relocation efforts were less successful than in situ upgrades. And then in 2000s, decentralization and poverty reduction programs were introduced. Indonesia's decentralization in the early 2000s shifted responsibility for urban development to local governments, resulting in varying capacities to manage slum areas across region. Program focus on integrating slum upgrading with poverty reduction initiatives, such as the National Program for Community Empowerment, or we know as PNPM, or P2PK, P2PKP, P2KP. The PNPM urban program empowered communities with small grants to undertake neighborhood improvements. This decade also saw increasing cooperation between the government, NGOs, and international organizations. And as the challenges, rapid urbanization outpaced the rate of improvement. As Professor Kuhn also mentioned this problem, rapid urbanization. And slums continue to grow in metropolitan regions such as Jakarta, Surabaya, and Bandung. Environmental degradation and poor waste management in slum areas became pressing issues. Continued in 2010, National Slum Upgrading Program, or NSUP, or we know as Kotaku, very popular Kotaku projects. In 2016, the National Slum Upgrading Program was launched to address slum comprehensively in 269 cities. Kotaku aimed to achieve cities without slums by 2024 through better housing, through infrastructure and environmental management. This is the target, what we can see. Kotaku promoted public participation, working closely with local governments and communities to improve basic infrastructure. It combines slum upgrading with efforts to prevent the reformation of slums through spatial planning and housing policies. As the key issues, land tenure persisted, leading to conflicts over ownership and evictions. The growing informal economy and migration to cities continue to create new slums, making it difficult to fully eliminate them. 2020s, up to now, today's sustainable development goals and green urbanism were promoted, and government also developed many kind of programs. Indonesia aligns its urban development strategies with SDGs number 11, sustainable cities and communities, which includes ensuring access to adequate housing and basic services for all. Kotaku continuation and innovation. Now incorporating climate resilience into urban upgrading programs, reflecting the increasing need for sustainable urban solutions. Digital tools such as GIS-based mapping of slums are being used to plan and monitor programs more efficiently. Collaboration with private sectors for affordable housing development through public-private partnerships, use of vertical housing solutions or Rusunawa to optimize land use in densely populated cities, increasing emphasis on environmental sustainability, such as green infrastructure to manage urban floods and improve waste management. At the conclusion, Indonesia's approach to slum improvement has evolved from basic infrastructure provision in the 1970s to more integrated and sustainable strategies in 2020s. While KIP and later programs like Kotaku have not been achieved great success, challenges like land tenure insecurity, rapid urbanization, and environmental degradation remain critical. Going forward, the focus on SDG alignment and green urbanism will be essential to ensuring lasting improvements in urban slums across Indonesia. This is the part 2 of my presentation is begin to analyze the problem. We can see that the persistent challenges like land tenure insecurity, rapid urbanization, and environmental degradation in Indonesia's slum improvement efforts reflects various complex problems. Amongst those challenges, the first issue is weak land tenure and governance framework. Informal settlements often develop on state-owned riverbank or disputed lands, and residents lack secure legal tenure. And then also the uncontrolled urbanization and rural urban migration become the issue. Rapid urban migration from rural areas has consistently outpaced infrastructure development in cities. So the problem is the development from the government. And then Indonesia government also face the inefficient urban planning and spatial enforcement. Poor urban planning and ineffective zoning laws lead to the uncontrolled growth of informal settlements. And as the impact, the situation fosters the continuous growth of slums in peri-urban areas and near economic centers, where housing remains unaffordable. And issue number 4, lack of affordable housing. Housing remains unaffordable for many low-income families, forcing them to settle in informal areas. As the cause is, high urban land prices make affordable housing projects financially unviable. Government programs such as Rumah Susun or Rusunawa, low-cost flats, are very, very limited in number and often poorly maintained. Public-private partnership in affordable housing have not scaled adequately to meet demand. And as the impact, low-income families have few alternatives, resulting in continued growth of informal settlements. And issue number 5, environmental degradation and climate vulnerability. Informal settlements often develop in environmentally fragile areas, such as flood-prone riverbanks and coastal zones, exacerbating urban environmental problems. As we know, the impact is environmental degradation, worsen living conditions in slums, and increase public health crisis. And this happened in almost all metropolitans in Indonesia, including Jakarta, Surabaya, Bandung, Medan, Makassar, etc. So now we come to the very basic analysis, very fundamental, to look at the root causes. This is systemic problems. Thank you for Professor Kuhn for the presentation of system thinking. This is the problems in dealing with the very, very complex problems like housing, urban development, how to make it integrated with the transportation, spatial planning, and many other aspects. All the challenges above reveals deeper systemic problems that have maintained the same problems and have not been fully resolved across decades in Indonesia's slums improvement efforts. The systemic problems embrace weak governance frameworks, project-oriented activities, institution fragmentation, poor coordination, and the absence of an integrated and comprehensive housing and urban development framework. And there are 3 root causes. Firstly, it's about governance and institutional fragmentation. Responsibility for slum improvement are spread across multiple government agencies, resulting in poor coordination and efficiency. Decentralization since the early 2000s shifted authority to local governments, but many cities lack the financial or technical capacity to address slum issue effectively. There is limited coordination between urban planning, housing, and environmental agencies at different government levels. Finally, fragmented efforts make it hard to deliver integrated and sustainable slum improvement projects. And we can see this root cause, in this political year, political bad influences, political interests, and short-term policies will override long-term urban planning strategies. This is the root cause. Yeah. Housing and urban development programs are based on election-driven initiatives. Politicians tend to introduce new programs during election cycles to gain popularity. Urban development plans often change with shifts in political leadership, and programs are driven by short-term political interests rather than long-term planning and strategies. That is well known. Many popular programs in Jakarta, for example, since Governor Fauzi Bowo, continued by Governor Joko Widodo and Basuki Cahayapurnama, and the latest Anies Baswedan. Every governor has their own popular program or project, but not effectively can solve the problem. Urban development plans often change with shift in political leadership, and programs are driven by short-term political interests rather than long-term planning and strategies. For example, inconsistent housing and urban policies, some government prioritize relocation, while others focus on in situ upgrading. And while there is no resettlement policy framework, this is from national government, no resettlement policy programs. Housing uncertainty in housing and urban project planning. As the impact, there is lack of long-term urban planning and policy continuity. Cities are lack of comprehensive master plan that integrates housing, infrastructure, environmental resilience, and social development over the long term. As the result, many slum upgrading initiatives are unsustainable or abandoned when leadership changes. And this is the last root cause. There is no community participation in policymaking. While some programs such as KIP, PNPM, and USSP, and Kotaku trying actually to promote community participation, but in other side, many urban policies still overlook the needs and voices of slum residents. Slum residents are often excluded from decision-making processes or have limited access to information about housing programs. As we can see, there are still many evictions come from the government in Jakarta, in Kampung Bayam, near the GIS Stadium. Top-down approaches still dominate policy making, making it difficult for grassroots initiatives to influence urban planning. Without meaningful involvement, residents resist relocation efforts and infrastructure upgrades that do not align with their needs. As the conclusion, persistent structural problems require systemic, institutionalized, and long-term solution. Indonesia faces recurring slum-related challenges because these issues, land tenure insecurity, uncontrolled urbanization, and poor housing policy, have not been fully addressed. This is a very systemic problem of weak government and no participation in housing, settlement, and urban development. While programs like KIP, PNPM, and Kotaku have achieved very limited success, the underlying problems require a more holistic, dedicated, and long-term approach. Government need to strengthening the land tenure frameworks, promoting regional development, meaning the city-to-city relation, regional cities planning, etc. And improving coordination between national and local governments, expanding affordable housing programs, and building climate resilience into urban policy to manage environmental risks. By tackling these root systemic issues, Indonesia can create sustainable solutions that reduce the growth of slums and informal settlement and improve the quality of life for urban residents. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jiangsa, for your enlightening presentation on urban slum improvements. And also, you introduced us about the overview of the slum improvement over the decade in Indonesia and also the challenges persistent challenges, and also the root causes of the slums. And next, we go to the third presenter, Dr. Sri Suryani. She is a lecturer and researcher at a Housing Settlement Research Group, SAPPK ITB. She earned her PhD from the University of Sheffield, with her research focus on the displacement of riverine communities in Jakarta due to urban river development. And her expertise includes housing, river development policy, participatory design, river dwelling communities, and flood mitigation strategies. Dr. Sri Suryani has also worked as a community architect with Yayasan Ciliwung Merdeka, facilitating participatory housing design along the Ciliwung River in Jakarta, and as an assistant architect at the Center for Urban Design Studies in Bandung. And since 2023, she has been an associate fellow of the Royal Geographical Society in London. Today, she will be discussing the House of the Rich, Freedom, and Irony of Continuous Rebuilding in Riverine Settlements. We look forward for your presentation. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Budian, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Is it okay if I stand up and join at the front? So today I will explain briefly the summary of my PhD thesis, which is just recently submitted in the library, and some of initial reflection that I have discussed with my friend, one of them is Athena. She's joining in the Zoom, about the development of the PhD thesis, that we start to think about human settlements in the context of relational landscapes. And I think it's a very interesting way of looking at human settlements in these days, because we are facing a lot of different exhaustive news, media's information about climate change, about climate crisis, and a lot of environmental issues. But we also have a lot of emerging youth participation and voices in the social media, and participation on also government and NGOs, and they're starting their own business. And I think it's very interesting phenomenon and also a potential. And today I will respond to the previous titles or that Budian mentioned about the House of the Rich, but I escalate the idea of the rich into this idea of seas and islands. And this is a very, I would say, personal understanding of the rich, because I was born in Indonesia. It's an vast archipelagos in Southeast Asia. We have a lot of islands, of course, because it's archipelagos, and also a vast space of water, the seas. And I propose this with my colleagues, how to think about water differently. What if we look at seas as something that makes us related as a inhabitants of the earth? I would say like that. So this is the, this is the brief introduction about me, how to position my presentation. I like hiking, so I'm interested in landscapes. And this is one of the picture I Semeru. If anyone, one of you from Malang maybe knows, this is the Mahameru. And this is something that I start to learn when I joined architecture program for my undergraduate, that actually I like studying architecture, but in terms of environment, in terms of its context of its surrounding landscapes, not only in terms of the building itself and the human, but also in the relational context with its ecology. And this is something that Budian already mentioned. I study in ITB, and then I continue my master in UCL, and it's focusing on development studies. And lastly, I study in School of Geography and Planning, because I focus on understanding displacement in riverine settlements in Jakarta. Yes, I have a brief experience in working in urban design consultant and also NGO before I joining as an academia in ITB. So this is some of the dots of the earth. Let's say the world, I wouldn't say the earth, but the representation of the world that I will engage with today. There are some spots that you may familiar, but some of them maybe I can continue and introduce. And back to the topic about the slum. I think it's very interesting how the term remains with us today. Permukiman kumuh. Kumuh, yeah, in Indonesian language. And the question is whose willingness and what does it matter to give a name on these settlements, on this way of inhabiting the place, on the ways of building architecture of dwelling amongst these people. And my proposition is that what if the slum can be surrounded by gathering relational geographies of landscapes, and by doing that, there is a redescription of slum with global history of migration that surrounds the future, because it's always the term, it's about sustainability, it's about the future, it's about generational thinking with multiple paths and also the unknown, because we never know what happened tomorrow. There's something also unknown. But how we think about it in different way. And I'm interested to talk about this because of my background as an architecture student, and now I'm a lecturer. Because we are working with visual mediation, and I will engage a lot with maps, iconic themes, and photography. And through this, there are some keywords that I use: mediation, secrecies, and surrounds. Mediation constitutes memories of dwelling, and secrecies consists of something that we don't know or we forget, but we're hard to remember. There is a spirituality of it, and the surrounds, and it backs to us and our identity, our belonging. Where do we go home? Kemana kita pulang? Who are we? The questions of our position. And this is the main argument, the main ideas that I offer. Because I focus about displacements of riverine settlements, I need to talk about water. Mau nggak mau bicara air, karena sungai adalah air. Because river mainly alive through the presence of water. And this is also a very intriguing things, because water in flooding in urban areas mostly narrated as a disaster. But when it begins, when does it begin? When does it end? And what if we think of water differently? And my proposition is, what if water mediates relational landscapes of slums across the globe? And what if we think about what happens in this way of living with water, not in binary thinking of people resisting to live in this, let's say, very precarious landscape, and also resilient, as if they can stay there and they're resilient. What if there is something other than these narratives? And I propose that we can look at through a grounded observation of life. And this is something that I think resonates a lot with the previous speakers, Prof. Kun and Odihan, because it brings on the relational understandings of how we live in this world, and how the way we live shaped by power, of course, by the government. And in the end, because I'm using this stance, I propose to think about slum as an intimate space of living. It's a really relational and heterogeneous places of home. This is the earth, and it's the way we define different kind of urban worlds. Bagaimana kita mengimajinasikan kota yang berbeda. Dan ini kritik yang mungkin harus disampaikan. This is something that I have to ask. Why does some slum becoming a recurring symbols of poverty and inequality? Why is it singled out in theme of sustainable cities and communities in 20th century? And what are possible description through landscape history? Since the establishment of UN Habitat, there is always continuous narrative of slums, but we rarely talk about what does it mean in terms of multiple histories of places of dwelling across different parts of the world. And if you look at the recent SDGs report, the slum is specified only in the 11th, only in terms of cities. But the rest of it seems like they are detached of the idea of slums. And something that I will talk about is the fact that actually if you look at slum as the way of dwelling, the way of living, it's something that is all connected. It's the way we shape our built environment. That's the role of architecture and planning. So think about it as a relational. And this is something I'm very brief about theories, but just to mention that what I engage to talk about this today, there are two kinds of literature in the library. The first is assemblage thinking. It's something that I think it's already been taught in UK quite a long time. But the idea is that to think about relational geographies with ethics, with the question of different ways of context across the world, because most of the critique of relational geographies is the way that it's some kind of neutralize different parts of the different ways of living in different parts of the world. And the second one is feminist studies of geography. I'm interested about feminist studies of geography because I think it's very important to talk about labor when we talk about slums. Kenapa kita perlu bicara tentang kerja saat bicara tentang pemukiman kumuh? Karena di sanalah tempat para pekerja, kelas pekerja tinggal. Di sanalah tempat para pekerja bermukim. That is where a lot of working class people afford to live. That's where they build their social relations. That's where they imagine social mobility. And I think that's why feminist studies were concerned and critically to think about labor is very important to engage. And the cross-cutting ideas between those two are the ways of mediation that we are always engaged in everyday study: architecture, infrastructure, space, materiality. And this is something that I will talk further. And I'm interested because of what if we look at archival material and see what we can imagine in the past to think about what's going on in the present. This is a map of trading. This is a map for a trading route made by Ekman Halley in 19th centuries. And this is a view of general coasting trade winds. So in the past, the explorers create maps to see the expansions of territory, the way land can be extended beyond their own inhabitation. And this is the way they explore. And strangely, this kind of maps persist, right? We know that this is a equator. And Indonesia is exactly in the middle of equator. And we're exactly a gathering of islands compared to the vastness of continents. So we have a very distinctive typology of landscape, meaning that we have a very distinctive kind of river. And it's very interesting how we are also connected to the winds, actually. The winds and of course the water. And this shapes our relations to of course the sun and the stars, the moon, and how people can navigate through the oceans in the past. And that's the starting point of when we look at Indonesia today. This is from Badan Informasi Geospasial. And I learned a lot. This is something that I learned quite recent after PhD. about earth science of what kind of knowledge that has been produced in Indonesia about Earth and about territorial landscape of Indonesia, and we can see that there is a depth of ocean, and you can see that Java Sea is actually not really deep compared to the rest of waters, and the sea under the Papua is also not really deep. It's connected to Australia. So when we look at water and think more about the idea of depth, if it can also create different understandings of how we perceive the danger of water, for instance, or the kind of dwellings that can respond to this change of elevation with water. And this is something that I will connect in my case of Jakarta. So by this understanding, when I look at Jakarta, I look at the landscape between the volcanoes of the Java Island and also the Java Sea. This is beyond the city boundaries. This is a relational landscapes, the islands and the seas. And this is something that I'm speculatively draw with watercolor, how the landscape of Jakarta evolves from 3rd century to the present, to 20th century, and how it changed over time, and how it's facing a very strong torrential rain because we are in the tropics, and how it's also shows very flat topography of Jakarta, which makes so much sense to see how it's inundated with water during rainy season. And that's where, once the landscape is understood, it's very easy to think about human intervention, about how we settle in a place through the presence of the ports that connect the settlements in Java with the rest of the surrounding landscapes. We know that Jakarta is developed very escalatively quickly after port-farm development and colonial expansion through the plantation across Java Island, the invention of irrigation development, and the way we change the landscape from the tropical forests to these rice fields, and how then this kind of process affects the way the human inhabitants also change, because they move from different parts of the island to work in this new development of plantation and industrial development of the plantation. So we cannot really separate the architectures of belonging, the home, the house, the settlements, with this livelihood, the labor, the kind of work that these inhabitants perform. And the fact that water is the key that mediates and sustains this process. And when I look from this archival material from the past, it becomes more somehow to see what happens in the present. This is the place where I did my work in the riverbank settlements of Chilihu and your life. This is the way they respond to the ebb and flow of water, the floods. So they build houses higher from the zero level of from the street, and they have a vertical infrastructure, very simple and very temporary, but it's very strategic and tactical. And how the nearness of these settlements with water is very beneficial, because that's where a lot of groundwater is contained. This is very rarely discussed, the fact that riverine settlements persist, because the water storage underground water is actually quite I would say it's enough for running a workshop business. This is a home industry in the riverine settlements that they employ approximately like 6 people, and they're working from they're coming from Sukabumi, from the West Java, from the upper higher landscape of West Java to stay there temporarily. So this is not like a permanent home, but they work there and come and go seasonally to work and sell this home industry to the nearest market. And this is also a proposition when we look at the past history of irrigation development and reflect to the ways the current government plan, design, and maintain their infrastructure for flood control, and how in the everyday practices, this infrastructure is used as a playground for the children. You can see that the children plays in the dams when it's dry. So it's a very interesting to reimagine what kind of infrastructure that maybe can be better imagined in this new context of urban activities. Because this is not designed for urban activities. This is like a very practical irrigation for rural areas. But what if we rethink and reimagine irrigation infrastructure in urban context? I think it's very interesting to look at it. And also, of course, the role of rain and water that change the street. And suddenly the lives of the street change when there is a rain. There are a lot of emerging sellers, PKL, that change the nuance of street temporarily, because once the rain stop, they stop and then the street continues as it was before. And also when rain happens, it gives actually life for plants and birds, and they're enjoying the presence of water. So this is very interesting how our understanding of disaster can also be stretched into spectrum. What kind of water that should be named as something dangerous, because there is always more than that narrative of disaster. And this is the last thing about my observation, how I observe the interior of houses of these riverbank settlements, and how I identify the fact that these people are knowing each other's because they are relatives. Some of them are siblings, and by thinking about it, actually this is like a home, like one home but different kind of partitions. And the way they can design the interior very compact by arranging a very flexible interiors in the house into 2 floors, and designing the toilets under the stairs and something like that. So it's actually very helpful. So this is something that I think there needs to be further discussion on what constitutes dwelling. And when I read some of literature in the eastern part of Indonesia, this is Strait of Aru. Mungkin ada yang tahu Kepulauan Aru di Papua. There is a Strait of Strait Aru, and people there even name it as a river because it's a very close space between the 2 islands. So this is something interesting because what is the distinctions of name for water then, if a strait can be river? This is something very interesting, and the fact that also because the shallow level of the sea, when there is a ebb and flow, you can see the ground of the beach. So it's very dynamic landscape and very interesting in the ways that the people there respond to that. And they build the settlements elevated and using very local materials and very clear and very distinctive organization as well. Most of the narrative, especially I wouldn't say most, but I'd say a pattern that governmental survey would say this is slum, this is kumuh, because it doesn't have a proper sanitation, it doesn't have a permanent structure like bricks or cement, something like that. So we can question again, what does it mean to talk about slums? And this is the end of talking about Jakarta. I will briefly talk about some places that I'm interested with to talk about slums. Talk about again relational landscapes. Again, I'm very careful to talk about slums in terms of poverty because this is something that social and political reform mostly used in 19th century. For instance, this is a survey of Inquiry of Life and Labor in London, how the majority of poverty can be identified near the river. If you can see the map, very close to the water, and somehow it defines this is the location of poverty. But in fact, actually, this is the place where a lot of industrial work happens. A lot of industrial work developed through the presence of this labor to these workers. And this is the image how the development of factories and industrial complex will require a lot of workers to work there. And the surrounding areas of this is considered slum because this is very intriguing conditions of how labor is understood in different historical era. So this is before there is a factory. It's a very natural marshland. Ini adalah rawa di area Sungai Thames, and then there is a development of factories, and this is where human settlements emerged, and this is where the slum narratives that emerge with the terms of poverty. So look again in different contexts. This is, anyone knows this? Ada yang mau nebak? This is Caracas. This is the capital of Venezuela, and you can see the landscape of the surrounding mountains actually shape how the city is planned, right? And how does it define periphery and the outskirts, the borders? And there is a very interesting phenomenon how there is a squatting movements towards empty buildings because of there is a political policy from the president, Hugo Chavez, who give a permission for people to squat unused land. And there is amazing squatters come and squat in this place. But when we look at the past, actually, these settlements actually is a very, very shaped by the hillside. So again, it's shaped by the contour and the rivers. And this is also another very iconic image of slums. This is in Kenya, in Nairobi. There is a slum settlement called Kibera. If you look at the scale of it, it's very easy to think about it in terms of visual impression of the density. But when you look at the history, actually, there is a very clear and very long, I would say it's very, very long and intriguing narrative of infrastructure between in the past between two states now, like Kenya and Uganda. There is a railway infrastructure, and there is also a dam made in near the settlements, and how the water also is present because it's a very near to of the Nairobi River. So there is a very strong connection again between the settlements and the water. And lastly, this is a very quick discussion about another iconic example. This is Mumbai in India, very dense as well and very close to the apartment complex. And actually, Mumbai is made by islands. It was islands, and then it was gradually reclaimed and become some kind of like a age of islands, like extensions of from the mainland. And we can see how this kind of extension rarely see how the life of people who live in the islands traditional fishermen remains and continuously persists to occupy this landscape. The name is Poli people, and they are actually very close related to the water. They're fishermen, and they continuously maintain their food and their performance, cultural performance. So in the end, this is a proposition and provocation to see how we look at water and land differently, by see how I would say seas and islands are actually very connected, but at the same time, it's very strange that we feel like sometimes we're alone, but we're not alone. We're all connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sri Suryani, for such a thought-provoking presentation. And she talks about the slum in relational landscape of the sea and island, and water mediates the landscape of slum across the globe, and to rethinking why the slums becoming recurring symbols of inequality and poverty. So next we continued our last speaker, Ms. Husnul Hanifati, FDMRs. Ms. Hani, are you there? Okay. Known as Hani, Miss Hani is a researcher and lecturer at Institute of Technology 10 November, and she was a secretary of Architectural Sans Frontiers in 2017. And now she is still active in ASF, and she has a keen interest in heritage and post-colonial issues, which motivated her to pursue a master's degree in architectural history and theory at the University of Indonesia. Prior to this, she completed her architectural education at University of Diponegoro, Semarang. So today she will be speaking on rethinking slum realities from intervention to collaboration in kampung development and land reform. Ms. Hani, we are excited to hear from you. Time is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Dian, for introducing me. I'll be the last presenter for today, and I hope, because I'm the only online presenter in here, I hope that the discussion and the topic that I'll be delivering won't reduce. And it's a relief that I'm actually the last presenter, because I got to heard 3 other presenters that interrelated to one another, and including me. So I will share my screen now. Yeah, so thank you for having me. I'm Hani from ASF Indonesia, and now I'm currently work as a lecturer in ITS Surabaya. And in today's presentation, I'd like to share our reflection from one of our project in Kampung Kunir. So instead of talking about the whole project since the beginning, I'd like to share what we already been done and the reflection. It'll be focused on collaboration between kampung dwellers, NGO, and government bodies. And I will highlight the importance of network in fostering resilience, so self-sustaining communities, and redefining slum development from charity to solidarity, because those changes from charity to solidarity and self-help is important when we're talking about the agency. And a case study in Kampung Kunir, where ISF Indonesia and Jakarta take a role in it, gives practical insight to see how this collaborative effort can reshape urban slum development. So before that, I would like to give a brief background about ISF Indonesia. So ISF Indonesia was founded in 2015, and we are working in the fields of alternative construction technologies, participatory design, and community planning. But for the last few years, our focus is a little bit shifting from practical into more research and discourse based. So I hope that by partaking this discussion, it will foster our movement as well. So these are the highlights that I'm going to talk about for today. First, the historical context of slum and kampung Indonesia is really important to emphasize because there is colonial legacies that inform us to understand kampung as a slum. And then I will be talking about land reform and the opportunity to reclaim kampung. This is where our project started when the new land reform in 2015 started. And then we'll talk about collaboration and the role of redefining slum development. And lastly, about the project. So here, this is a quote from Jeremy Till talking about special agency. When we're talking about to whom and for whom as the theme of this discussion, this seminar, it is really important to talk about the agency. And to foster special agency and to thrive, we need to open conversation and collaboration. And this will empower everyone involved and calls for a balance between being proactive and in a practical matter. And it is about recognizing that time plays a role in shaping spaces and ensuring that everyone has a voice. So special agency emphasize in negotiation, persistent creativity, teamwork, and cooperation from the community that can lead to more ethical and more thoughtful spaces. So it is about seeing yourself as a responsible part of the process and working towards more inclusive and fair environment. So moving to historical context of slum and kampung Indonesia, the colonial legacy and how we understand kampung and slum is very, very rooted to during the colonial era, where in this map, this is a map around the end of 19th century, 18 something until 1930s. And in this map, the area is divided into two. First is build-up area, which is planned by the city government and reside by mostly European citizens. And the other is unbuilt area. And this unbuilt area now we can determine, we can see that it has transformed to become a kampung. And during the colonial periods, when kampung communities were marginalized, these communities exercised their own form of agency by shaping informal settlement. That is, in fact, they are growing outside of the quote unquote, the unbuilt area. And one of the reasons we perceive the setting of kampung as a disorganized and need an external improvement, especially infrastructure, is because of the colonial perspective, which is built, unbuilt, setting by mostly pribumi residents in the unbuilt area. And that is that understanding is deeply rooted in this deficient by the colonial. And then the term slum itself, sometimes associated with informal settlement, deteriorating living condition, and as well as kampung, has historically been framed by external intervention that overlook the agency of its inhabitants. In the previous presentation by Pak Jihansyah, he already mentioned about the kampung improvement programs in 70s, but in this picture, there were an attempt by the colonial to improve the kampung around the 1930s. And the motive is slightly different because at the time there were pandemic in the built area and they want the pandemic not to spread. So they fixed up the infrastructure outside of the unbuilt area, and which is kampung. And from here, from this perspective, we also see how the materials seen differently. On the right picture, all of the local materials and materials that is not that is temporary, that is not permanent, wiped off and seen as unhealthy, and it should be improved and cleaned. And this also has been explained about the urbanization moving to the modern era where the kampung started to urbanize, started to spreading. Dr. Cohen already explained about the process of slum creation, and the reason is because of there were rapid urbanization. And this rapid urbanization actually started because of rural and urban migration, and it creates uncontrolled urbanization or uncontrolled era. And there's a transfer of rural poverty from the rural area to urban areas, and that's also one of the causes why the slum started to develop in urban area, and which is mostly happen in kampung. But to understand kampung itself, there are multiple realities that we should uncover and we should understand. And in this diagram, we try to understand kampung as life cycle. And it emphasized that the environmental setting is crucial element, and it is an equal right for every citizen. So the diagram itself talking about the human life cycle and its implication on their living space from the early childhood until their end. So it's basically how you expand your life setting from home and then your neighbored area as a special area. And then as you grow older, the urban area will be expanded, and you will go back again to your initial born place or your home neighborhood. And therefore, the life cycle emphasized that the setting is crucial. And kampung itself is a unique locality receiving migrants from the countryside and transforming into an urban area. And there's also a interesting proposition that kampung can be seen as a place, as a cycle for people to move from the rural to urban, their struggle for their economic, and when they are becoming better in terms of economic, they can move out or even improve their livelihood in the kampung itself. Yet somehow in a postmodern era, the eviction in kampung is still happening, and the reason is because we've seen it differently from the reality and the process of creating the kampung itself. And there are several reasons, and the first is because kampung were never formally incorporated into urban planning, and especially from the authorities who have the power to create a design or to decide something. And then next, planners also saw kampung as an empty spaces within the urban system. And during the late 1970s, also added the shift in planning where the wipe off of urban kampung, and it result eviction carried out formally and forcibly without negotiation of the people. And this is the role of land reform in addressing historical injustice. And again, it is rooted from the regulation that the Dutch created. So the colonial period marginalized kampung resident because of the favored of European settlers and plantation owners and land policies. So the system like Kulturstelsel or forced cultivation in here and agrarian law or free state domain exacerbated the disposition of ancestral land because they will develop the area for the sake of economy and exploitation. But in somehow in 1870s agrarian law, it is stated that any encumbered by designated European or indigenous right were automatically considered the property of the state. And this is the basis of agrarian reform in 1960s, where many people able to reclaim their land, even though the regulation itself become layered. Because in fact, it'll be difficult for people to do that. And after the independence of 1945, the government sought to try to redistribute land, particularly from large plantation to local farmers. And in this context, it is mostly happened in the rural area. And but the implementation of this reform faced challenge. And in 1960, the changing political regime shifted the regulation by overtaking the Dutch land or asset by the state as the common belief during the Suharto era. So the land that was formerly claimed by the people were claimed back by the government to create for the common benefit. And as Abid and Kusno said, it is to use this land for a development as a means to legitimize power. But only later on, in 2015, the agrarian reform started to redistribute the land again, and it is started to be implemented in the urban area. So with the new government policy in 2015, the kampung residents have entered a new chapter in their land rights and tenure. And the aim of this new policy is to reorganize the use, control, and ownership of the land in the country. Through 2015 agrarian reform, and through regulation of the task force, which was created in 2018. And this task force is aimed to solve land dispute, and it was targeted to give back the 4.5 hectare of land to the people. And in 2015, after the mass eviction in Jakarta, the agrarian law began to be considered in a rural area so that the people were able to reclaim back after their kampung were evicted. And here where ASF was involved in those redefining of reclaiming the land and developing the kampung. Instead of looking the development or improving the kampung from the top-down perspective, we're shifting to more collaborative approach, seeing from charity to self-help and solidarity. And in here, special agency shift the focus from a charity base to the self-help. And we see kampung dwellers as a co-creator of their environment. This fosters a sense of ownership and solidarity, empowering communities to develop spaces that suit for their culture, their needs, and rather than spending on external actor to help them or just a mere infrastructure. And in here, we try to build the networks between many different actors, namely NGO and it wasn't just ASF who was involved, but there are some others NGO that is not really related to architecture, not related to building, and also researchers from the different universities, and then kampung resident, anthropologists, student, and architect. And in here, special agency help explain how this network are essential in enabling communities to exercise for the community to control over their spaces. And here started to talk about what we did in Kampung Kunir. So since 2014 until 2016, there were a lot of eviction in kampung around Jakarta. And I choose 3 kampung in here that were affected because all of this 3 kampung already rebuilt again, even though the rebuilding result is not quite the same with the house and dwelling that they used to have. So first in Kampung Pula and Bukit Duri, they were affected in 2015 and 16, and there were 500 and 1,000 families affected, but only 75 families remained. And while in Kampung Kunir was affected in 2015 and 2016, so the eviction is not happened just once, but also twice affected, and there were 77 families affected and only 33 families remain. And lastly, in Kampung Aquarium, which was affected in 2016, there were 387 families affected, but only 113 families remain. And the context of Kampung Kunir itself, it is located alongside the Ciliwung River, and it's close to Fathahillah Square. It is actually part of Kampung, it is part of Kota Tua and very close to Kota Tua Station. And there were 73 people that were affected and only 33 remains. And 14 decided to move to an apartment blocks, while 26 other coming back to their hometown. And the area that affected itself is not just kampung, but also public facilities. There was small prayer room, primary school, common areas, and RAF. And you can see the area that were affected from the map in 2003 and in 2017. And interestingly, what happened in Kunir is that they already got some green award from the government. So before they were affected, the government already visited the area, and they even got the green award for their kampung. And we've involved in around 2016, so it's already been around 8 years now. Even though the kampung is already rebuilt again as a kampung susun, but the effort to have more sustainable living is still happening up until now. So all of this timeline we gather by doing a workshop with the people. So each and every story that the people tell to us, already mentioned here, even the individual and very personal stories we write down. And the reason is for them to understand about their own area and to create connection between themselves and their livelihood. Since the eviction was already done twice, and at the time they were living out of a rumbling, we have to create those attachment to their kampung. And the kampung itself was started in 1979. And all of the event was written down in here. There were flooding and there were fire back in 91. And this is where they got their Green and Clean Award in 2010. And in 2015, the eviction happened, and this is the starts where we started our facilitation with the people. And after we initiate the facilitation in 2018, the government decided to create temporary shelter. And during the process of the design, we asked the people to be involved. And in picture here, this is where they are dividing their unit in temporary shelter. And in between the having the shelter and building their kampung susun, we conduct a workshop that in here, we conduct a workshop that try to remind them about their housing they had before the eviction. And the reason is to make them understand that there will be a changes because the lane area of the building is not the same with the housing that they used to have. And by involving the people in here, they will understand more about their housing and how to maintain it, and the reason the building should be 4 stories instead of 1 stories like the house in kampung they used to have. And this is the result of the kampung susun that was it was in 2022. And there are 2 others that were rebuilt in Kampung Susun Cakung, Kampung Aquarium, and Kampung Susun Kunir. That will be the end of my presentation, and thank you.
To have questions for speakers. Oh, okay. Please say your name and
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Neska. I'm a 4th-year architecture student, and I was very interested with the presentation, especially, I have 2 questions. The first one is about how we view slums and poverty. It wasn't quite answered, at least to me. I was interested about how the arguments in redefining slums. Do you think if we change the definition towards slums as poverty, it will affect the way we view it? And thus, perhaps maybe it can change our approach. Like maybe if we redefine slums not as poverty, we can touch the topic not as a taboo or burdenful or looked down upon topic. That is the first question. And then my second question is, why do you think kampungs were never formally incorporated into urban planning? Do you think perhaps it is because of the temporal or spontaneous nature of kampung that makes it hard for planning policies to touch them? I guess that is all I want to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Ms. Nessa. Can we go to the answer next? So please maybe the speaker can answer the first question, how we view the slums of property and redefining slums.
Thank you for question, Neska. Ya. Neska, berarti tingkat berapa ini? Wow, it's a very critical question. Actually, it's very hard. Mas Bu Alis. Oh, Pak Divya. Oh, Pak Divya. Pak Divya punya jawabannya pasti.
Saya dulu tingkat 3 ya.
Oh, tingkat 3. Proud the lecturers. Yes, it is a very, very hard to think about, like, can we even imagine the term without talking about poverty, because it's so embodied. It's like it emulates the idea of poverty, and that's why the questions of slums. Then I think both speakers, like Prof. Kun, Pak Jehan, and Hani, already explained very, very generously in different ways is how the term is very embodied to the materialist view of living. Like we consider the kind of life that is outside of the standard, as if there is one standard for every kind of life, right? And that's the questions of, I think poverty itself is a very intricate term, mostly understood in economic perspective, because I think it's coming from economic discipline, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not really digging more deeper into the idea of poverty, but of course poverty can be measured and quantified, and that's why I mentioned several times about the idea of labor, because this is a very embodied with the way we value our labor, the way different labors are appreciated. I think in Hani presentation, the previous presenter can explain about the past history of Jakarta is the way there is a colonial government, mostly our plantation manufacturers and leaders, managers, administrators live in this very planned settlement, and then there are workers of those plantations who live outside of that. And it's not really clear how the relationship between workers and company owners are understood, right? But there is, of course, a global context of that, because these are European companies who want to expand their business in Java, in Southeast Asia back then. So I think it's really hard. Of course, we have to acknowledge the conditions, but at the same time, there is more than that one narrative, because that's why I think when I look the ways in which they live their space, their everyday inhabitation, the houses, I think they're actually very creative and smart, but it's rarely recognized or even seen. You need to see it first before recognize it, right? That's why I offer also grounded observation, because by doing it and seeing in the ground, you can better understand that this is actually very creative, very I would say practical, and it relates to the second questions about the idea of planning that you mentioned, because it is true that it's very spontaneous and temporary, but at the same time, there is a very this kind of spontaneity wouldn't happen without a very deep understanding of their own home and their own neighborhood, their social life, their own understanding of their location, their identity. So when we see how the settlements being demolished and then they build again temporarily, it means actually they know what they're doing. They really understand the reason, the risk, and the future. And this is something that actually rarely discussed about the narrative of living in the city. And I believe that city is actually made by all these struggles to sustain and continuing enduring everyday working, maintaining relationships with neighbors, knowing how to go and where to go in the surrounding neighborhoods, maintaining contact with people with your relatives in somewhere, village or in other cities, your friendship. So this is something that actually very, very important, but it's rarely seen because we focus only on the physical presence of the house. I think that's my this one.
Yes, to me, the question is quite simple to make a very what to say we have to look at the definition of slums first. What is slums? Yeah. First is about the substandard housing, the building. Then the second is infrastructure. And the third is about the land ownership. So if those three aspects of slums, definition of slums, are not there, so in line with this question of the seminar, whose willingness? If you look at the infrastructure and land ownership, that is the willingness of the government, responsibility of the government. But so the poverty, yeah, many poor people live in slums area, but the slum settlements problems is not completely the same with poverty problems. Yeah, it is the responsibility of government to provide the infrastructure, to make it clear, the land ownership, and in many cases, the people will build their houses by themselves. Yeah. So that is the answer. This is more about abandonment of the government, omission from the government. Yeah. And then the slum settlements become wider and wider. And second about kampung. Let's look at the spatial planning, urban development planning from the government. What is the status of the kampung, land use status? If the status is green area, that is not kampung. That is illegal settlement. But if the government make the kampung as a preservation area or conservation area due to the cultural aspect, yeah, it is a conservation area, not illegal anymore. not informal anymore. So if the status of the land use is illegal, it is a green area, yeah, mainly the slums settlement developed in green area. Yeah, government should not abandon this problem. So if, for example, in Bandung, if you look at in Bandung, Jakarta, and many other, if you look at the RT/RW special plan, yeah, almost all the river banks are green, but in reality, slum settlements. What is that? That is abandonment. That is my mindset. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting question. Basically, as my neighbor, sorry, my neighbor said, poverty and slum is not identical. There's poverty, far wider poverty than slums. There's hidden poverty all over the city. There's poverty in rural areas. And on the contrary, not all the slum dwellers are poor. Some slum dwellers are very rich, and they exploit their fellow slum dwellers just like any other middle class or high class person. I'm talking in general. I don't know enough about Indonesia, but this is in general. It's also people, I don't know about street vendors here, but street vendors are not poor. You may think they are poor, they're not poor. They make a lot of money every day, but they choose to live in rather poor conditions because they need to sell their goods and they are sending money back home to the rural family. But they're not poor. They're making daily income. Well, this is my perception. I don't know exactly about Indonesia or Bandung, but this is what I learned in other countries. So on the other hand, I do agree that slum dwellers, like anyone who is in dire conditions, are very inventive. And having quite a bit of experience with migrants, I can tell you migrants are extremely resourceful, especially if they're illegal migrants. They're very resourceful, and they know exactly when the police is coming. They know exactly, and they know exactly how to escape. They're very resourceful. And it's not because someone lives in a slum that that person is not resourceful, on the contrary. So the whole evolution that has been depicted as far back as colonial times is basically a positive evolution where the voice of people in general is being recognized more and more. Will it come to the point that underserved settlements, I'm not talking about slums, underserved settlements, whether they are legal or cold slums or cold campaign or cold whatever, whether they will be integrated in official planning, I doubt it. I doubt it. Would there be need to find temporary solutions for land tenure, for example? I think that's a possibility. we also have to realize that many people who live in underserved settlements do so not because they are forced to, but because they choose to. In a big study of rental housing in Bangkok many years ago, we found out that, of course, there are people who rent out of necessity because they cannot afford to buy. But there are many people who rent consciously, very consciously. They rent because they don't want to pin themselves down or tie themselves down to a house, buying a house. And I think this is a general trend that is being confirmed in many European cities nowadays, where young people choose to rent not because they cannot afford it, but because they choose to spend their money otherwise, by working, for example, for 6 months and then coming as what do they call it? Working away from home in Bali or something like that. But that's a choice. And they choose to, first of all, remain single, for example, and secondly, to not to buy a house. So renting, living in an underserved settlement, not necessarily, but we don't need to necessarily victimize the people who live there, because they may very well choose to do so. And I think indeed, okay, I cannot speak for Indonesian government or authorities, but I think indeed there should be ways to find temporary land tenure or tenure systems, which have been in use historically in Indonesia, notably, and in many other countries in the world.
Okay, I'll want the answer. Neska, sorry. Okay. Sorry. Miss Honey, do you have an answer for the questions?
Yeah. So for the first question, I like Mbak Sri's term by using materialist view of living, because all of the things that happen in development in the city and a fiction that happened in Kampung is because of the drive from economical motivation. And that is the reason why we see Kampung as a material is substandard, and it should be improved. And it's a bit difficult to against the mainstream view of urban planning. But if we have that what if definition of poverty, it will actually open up other possibilities, and that is how we able to propose and rebuild the kampung. And this is related to the second question, and why is kampung never formally involved? And it's because of the assumption of being informal. And because of those drive of economical motivation, besides being informal, even though some of them actually formal due to a lot of layers of unclear regulation. But it's never formally involved because of those economical background. And if we are there enough to have another what if, for example, right to city, which mean that people with different backgrounds of economy able to reside in the city center, where mostly the price of the land is even higher compared to the rural area. It will allow us to have a more different kinds of option to give the space for people who is under in a standard definition is under in terms of like economy for the poor people.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hani. Next, we have other questions from the participants from the Zoom. Can we see the questions slides, please? Yes, Yasmin. So we have 6 questions here. Maybe I will choose to save the time. From Rijaluddin ASDM. The question is regarding the housing delivery system. How does land regulation impact the development of the housing delivery system in Indonesia? Is it a challenge or not?
Regarding the housing delivery system, how does land regulation impact the development of the housing delivery system in Indonesia? Is it a challenge or not? Yes, since the housing delivery system include the land provision at the very beginning of the system, of course, that the land regulation will impact the development of housing. But in my opinion, that is not to blame the land agency or to direct the problem to the land agency to make any reform or else. But this is still a responsibility of the government in the sector of housing and urban development. For example, the scheme of surface land, we know that as Kasiba, kawasan siap bangun, ready to build area development. That is not the scheme delivered by the land agency, because the land agency only issues the land status, land title, not the development. Once the land is used by any sector, in this sense, in housing and urban development sectors, that is the responsibility of the sector, housing sector. So the impact would be clearly big, very significant. But that is not the land regulation. Land development by the, for example, that as I mentioned before, the ready to build area or surface land, or in many urban redevelopment program, government make a kind of regularization or formalization of the land. As Professor Kuhn mentioned, also the temporary solution, many other, but that is not the land agency sector or the land regulation problems. This is my answer.
Thank you, Ms. Jihan. Maybe from Ms. Hani, do you have an answer for this question?
Yeah, I think it will impact between the land regulation to the delivery system in housing, because especially in the city, because I mentioned earlier about the affordability of people to have a housing in the city is to talk about poor people or slum people. It's already very difficult, even for people with standard like people in standard UMR, for example. It's already difficult for us to have the house in the city. And if the regulation is never have an intervention from the government, all of the people who's living in the city itself, it's probably only the rich. And yeah, I think that's that's very challenging when it comes to providing the housing for all, because in the city itself, it should be able to be settled down by different kinds of people with economic background, not just those who's able to afford economically.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Hani. Because we don't have so much time, maybe I will show one more questions from Nicholas from Architecture ITB. Thank you for the wonderful presentations from wonderful speakers. I agree that local involvement plays important role in revitalization of urban slums. I'm interested in participatory design in the process for urban kampung. Is the process still continue ever after the residents move to the new places? For example, in Kampung Kunir, Capung or Aquarium. I was wondering, is there any evaluation from the residents themselves and how the design process is continuation with the involvement of the locals?
Yeah, I think that's questions for me. So I'm gonna answer it. The effort for people to dwell in the Kampung Susun after it's finished is actually still happening, because even though the physical building is already built, but there are some aspect that's still uncovered. For example, land tenure. So because back then they have their own housing on the land, and they believe that they own the land, and taking into its consideration of people inherit their land. Now they can do that. And that the reason is because they have temporary land tenure, and they only able to reside there for several years. And besides that, we use the term Kampung Susun because we still maintain the connection between people in kampung, and even though it's not physically look like kampung, but the network of people and the livelihood and the needed community there is still there. Yeah, and these days we actually have another initiative to have it's called Perumahan Gotong Royong, or like Gotong Royong settlement, to be able to helping people to have their rights in the city, and also how they maintain their kampung susun, because the lifestyle of people who live in kampung to the place where they live vertically is quite different. And during the process of the design itself, we also involve people so that they able to maintain their housing without an external service, because that what actually makes the kampung susun or social housing more expensive, and they're unable to maintain their living in there. And there are some cases where after they live there, they move out and rent the house, and then they reside in another kampung. And we try not to have that cases in here by make them understand and make them attached to the building that they have right now.
Okay, very interesting question from Nicholas. The need of evaluation or even critical evaluation, not only from the residents. In my opinion, many projects in Jakarta in recent 5 years are quite political, yeah, not institutional. This is my opinion. As I present in my slides, this is one of the root cause, the political influence here from the governor. The question is why the previous governor develop a Kampung Susun program in only 3 areas, yeah, while the recent governor evict them, especially in Kampung Bayam, and make a kind of pressure to previous kampung like aquarium and Kunir. The recent governor asked for the payment, yeah, very high, because in my opinion again, this is not institutional. This is not a systemic solution. Quite a populist and political programs, yeah. So we have to make a very deep evaluation on this Kampung Susun. But in my opinion, in the field, yeah, the project's quite successful, but cannot be extrapolate or cannot be replicate in other areas. So in this sense, the scale does matter. Yeah, the notion of scale of the programs does matter. If government or governor will take this responsibility, not only 1, 2, or 3 kampungs. The government should develop for 100 kampungs and impact for thousands residents, etc. This is interesting to be more discussed. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan. So I think we don't have so much time today, so there are still many questions. Maybe we can you can discuss more with the speakers through email, maybe. So maybe because we don't have time, I will close this webinar. So today's webinar brought forward a rich and diverse discussion on urban slum development, peri-urbanization, and community-driven approach to tackling the persistent challenge for informal settlements. So our 4 speakers offered us invaluable insight that have broadened our understanding of both systematic issues and potential solutions. And in summary, today's discussion have illuminated the complexity of slum realities and the various approaches to addressing them, from system thinking and regenerative design to critics of state-led programs and community-driven land reform. So as we close this webinar, I encourage all of us to reflect on the ideas shared today and consider how we can further integrate these insights into practice, policy, and further research. The path ahead requires more than intervention. It demands true collaboration and collective willingness to embrace new paradigm for inclusive urban development. Thank you once again for our speakers and participants for making this enriching and thought-provoking event. And so after that, I hand over to Mr. Divya. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Budia. We have now reached the conclusion of this webinar. I would like to extend my gratitude to 4 speakers for sharing their inspiring insight. That's it. As well as the moderator for guiding the events. And then we have left us with many new and enlightenment perspectives. This morning event is part of the SAPPK 2024 webinar series with the overarching theme of the sustainable development of the built environment, organized weekly by different research groups within the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development Institute Teknologi Bandung. Okay, please mark your calendar for 2 more important dates in November and December for upcoming session. Maybe we can say the dates of the schedule of the next webinar. And to close this very wonderful event, can we take picture together? Wow. Okay. Maybe all the speakers, can you move to this area and then the devil will take picture on.
We are thinking too much today.
Yeah. Oh. Mereka semua ke sana. Oh, gitu. Oke.
Yang ke sana aja. Nanti dibuka aja.
Oh.
Nanti mereka sini aja ya.
Oke, seluruh peserta silakan maju ke depan. Kita foto bersama untuk acara kali ini. Terima kasih yang sudah hadir di Zoom. Tadi ada sekitar 60 sampai 70 peserta webinar kali ini. Dan nanti juga akan disiarkan secara langsung. Rekamannya ada di YouTube channel. Silakan maju ke depan. Kita foto bersama aja. Supaya Mbak Husno Hanifati juga bisa foto bersama kita.
Nggak jadi berdiri ya.
Oke, thank you atas kehadiran dari Dr. Kun dari Leuven, kemudian Pak Jiansyah, Ibu Sri, dan juga kemudian Kak Taji dan juga peserta webinar kali ini. Sampai jumpa di bulan Oktober Desember. Nanti silakan dicek aja ya di Instagram Arsitektur ITB, Arsitektur SAPPK sama Arsitektur ITB. Silakan.
Baik. 1, 2, 3. Oke, sekali lagi. 1, 2, 3. Oke. Sekali lagi, gak bebas. 1, 2, 3. Oke.
Oke, terima kasih banyak.
Thank you, very interesting.
Terima kasih Ibu Hanifati, Dr. Kun. Thank you
Iya,
very
terima
much.
kasih.
Bagi